This conference
the
will
report.
now be recorded.
Thanks, Ben. Any announcements or questions for the broader group? Nope. Okay. Who do we have on? Looks like Russ from Colorado Climate Center. Russ, are you giving the presentation today?
I am. How's
Awesome.
it going?
Good. Thanks for joining. You going to tell us about all the cold records we broke?
Sure.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and get your slides set up there? And
Ben made me the presenter. Okay, so let's give it a try. Okay. You see it okay on your end?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm gonna turn my mic off.
Okay. Well, yeah, morning everybody. Happy to be here as always. I realize I haven't given one of these presentations since way back in August, and think when I was looking back at my presentation from them, it was very, very different from because the half the state was on fire at that point. So a little bit different situation now, but we'll take a look at where things stand climate-wise. We'll start off with our usual recap of the water year up to this point. Figured our people in our office were very happy taking snowflake pictures last week when we were getting kind of the very light flurries coming down. Most of these are taken by Henry Regis from our office. Very, very cool dendrite snowflakes from the light snow last week before it got super cold. All right, so let's take a look back to January before we kind of get into the current conditions. January was another warm and dry month across Colorado. As you can see, warm across most of the country in contrast to what we have going on right now at the moment. So, you can see here in our list of months so far in the water year, aside from November, which was very warm, we've been kind of in the near to above average temperature category, but that puts us through January at the 15th warmest statewide water year in that 4-month period, 2.5 Fahrenheit above the 20th century average. And so through January, we've had 9 straight months of above average temperature statewide in Colorado. Last April was the last below average month, and it was just a teeny bit below average. But February this current month will probably break this streak given the cold that we've seen here the last week or two, but we'll take a closer look at that in a bit. And then looking at precipitation, January again was another dry month. We've been below average for all the months so far in the water year, and 11 straight months of below average precipitation. Last February was the last time we were above average for precipitation statewide. And so it's the 15th warmest and the 15th driest start to the water year through January. Statewide, almost 1.5 inches below the 20th century average. We'll see. This one is a little less certain whether this current month will end up above average, but we'll see, and we'll see more details on that when we get to our NRCS presentation after this. Looking in more detail then at temperature back to January, the West Slope was warmer than average most places. The Eastern Plains were near normal in terms of temperature. And then if we look to the full water year through January, similar story west of the divide. Most places have been warmer than average. Eastern Plains have been near average. And then a couple pockets in North Park and South Park colder than average. We always wonder a little bit whether there's not a ton of stations there, and obviously those locations are quite unique in their geography, and so we're always a little bit unsure how how well these gridded data sets are representing those spots. But in any case, we can see not, so as to where we're at, not an exceptionally warm start to the water year, but still, in the top 15, because we haven't, until just now, haven't had any real cooler than average months. Here's percentage of normal precipitation from January. Getting into the precipitation now, you can see again, it was very dry almost everywhere in Western Colorado, but we had some spots that had a couple of good snowstorms in Southeastern Colorado and other parts of the Eastern Plains that are looking, that looked better for January there. And if we look at that then for the water year as a whole through January, again, a lot of dry on the map. Most of the Eastern Plains, with again the exception of parts of the Arkansas Valley, have been drier than average. Almost all of Western Colorado is drier than average to start the water year. The San Luis Valley and parts of Park County, South Park, are the only places that are in the near to above average category. And then here is how that ranks percentile wise for the start to the water year. Again, much below normal in most of Western Colorado, near to above normal in the San Luis Valley and South Park, and then most of the Eastern Plains being dry, and especially some pockets of dryness around, just south of the Denver metro area and up onto the Palmer Divide, where we even saw some fires there a couple weekends ago. All right, so kind of where are we? This is another way of looking at where we're at. I've liked looking at these plots to kind of summarize the situation in terms of both temperature and precipitation. So just to orient you on here, so this is for the first 4 months of the water year, October through January. Basically, if you're up in the upper left, that's not where we want to be. That's the warm and dry drought category. Warm and wet would be in the upper right, cool and dry in the lower left, cool and wet in the lower right. Where we're at in water year 2021 so far is up here in the upper left quadrant. So warm and dry, not extreme like we had in 2018 to start the water year, for example, but certainly not where we want to be after a very, very dry water year of 2020. So, not looking great as far as this goes, though. As we'll see, February has started to turn things a little bit in a better direction. So February so far, can you find the mountains on this map? Basically, everywhere west of the divide has been warmer than average for February thus far, and some places quite warm. You can see some areas of 6 to 9 degrees above average for the month thus far in the mountains. Sorry, dogs are getting a little wound up here. But then we see everywhere east of the divide is very, very, very cold. And so, this like darker purple color here is 9 degrees below average, some 12 to 15 degrees below average in parts of the northeast corner of the state. So really, really cold, as we've seen here over the last, the last week and especially the last few days. So a really stark divide across the continental divide of warm conditions west and cool conditions east. Sorry, I'm going to send the dogs out here and be right back. All right. Okay, sorry about that. So right, as Megan mentioned at the beginning, the most notable story of February so far has been the cold, and just over the last couple of days. So this is the minimum temperature that was reached on either the 14th or the 15th across the state. And so you can see some very, very low numbers, especially on the Eastern Plains here. So pretty much everywhere on the Eastern Plains made it to -20 or lower. Holyoke at -30. There are a couple other stations, not as long-term stations, that got to like -32, -33. So that's some legit cold for Eastern Colorado. And you can see this is having, impacts throughout the the central and southern U.S. with the the huge impacts in Texas on the power grid and massive power outages and record cold throughout a lot of those areas. But you can see that the mountains stayed relatively warm through this. Still some negative numbers up there, but a lot of places, not nearly as cold as we saw in the Eastern Plains. There's a couple of long-term stations on the plains. Holyoke here that reached -30. That was their 5th coldest ever temperature. And Lamar to -27 at the climate station there. The airport got to -29, but at the climate station, that's the 3rd coldest it's ever been there. You see the #1 rank at both of these stations was February 12th, 1899. That 1899 cold outbreak was the strongest in modern history across most of the U.S. And so you can see those records still stand, and it's similar if you look in Oklahoma and Texas. That's kind of it's basically the coldest that it's been since that 1899 outbreak, cold air outbreak in a lot of those places. So it's really, really impressive, the magnitude and kind of extent of the cold air that we've seen. These maps always look a little weird in this time of year because they don't resolve the mountains very well. But in any case, you can this is percent of normal precipitation for the month so far. You can see some spots that are well above average for precipitation, and we'll get a better look at this at the Snotel stations as we go along, because that will be a better guide than a map like this. But you can see some places quite wet, some places quite dry, but hard to pull a lot of information out of this map, so I'll save that for later on. Okay, so we'll look now at Standardized Precipitation Index, or SPI, at a number of different time scales. So again, the color scale here goes from, the blues and purples and greens are wetter than average, and the yellows and oranges and reds and browns are drier than average. And this is standardized to the historical climate of each station, so it gives you a sense of how unusual it is. And so for the last 30 days, going back to mid-January, it's a pretty good picture across most of the state. You can see a lot of stations are in those green colors, and even some blues that indicate well above average precipitation for the last 30 days. And that's definitely what we want to see in the mountain areas, where this is a big time of year for precipitation. So looks pretty good on the 30 days, but as we go back further in time, then things just progressively get worse and worse. So if we look over the last 90 days, still doesn't look so terrible, with the exception of the northern, north central part of the state and the northern mountains being quite dry, and dry throughout the mountain areas, but not exceptionally dry through those over. So this goes back to mid-November. Then we step back to 6 months. So this gets us back into mid-August. And now we see lots and lots of the red and brown colors where, this is exceptionally dry conditions. This is going back into the extremely hot and dry summer that we had in northwestern Colorado, in parts of southwestern Colorado. And then if we go back to a year, so this time last year, still a pretty ugly picture, especially in western Colorado, with most of the stations still being in that, worse than -2. So, that would correspond to the D4 category on the US Drought Monitor. And quite a few places on the plains as well that show up in that category, although not as widespread. So again, more recent conditions have looked better, but as we kind of look back, the hole that was dug over last summer was very, very deep, and we're kind of trying to fill that in with precipitation here this winter, and making some progress toward it, but certainly not anywhere back to anywhere close to normal for this time in the winter. We can look at some of those individual stations. We'll take our little tour around the state that we usually do. going counterclockwise around, starting in the north. But I'm going to skip Grand Lake because as we may have mentioned at previous meetings, that weather station just north of Grand Lake is at the visitor center for Rocky Mountain National Park, which was obviously evacuated, and that general area burned in October, so they don't have data for much of October when they actually did get probably quite a bit of snow up there, but so we'll skip that graph for now. Going then west to Grand Junction, only about half of the average precipitation for the water year thus far. So, you know, not the average at this point in the water year is a little over 3 inches, and only had a little over 1.5 inches. And so just a reminder on these graphs, the dashed gray line, the thick gray line, is the long-term average. And then the black line is where we're at this point. And then the thin gray lines are all the other historical years going forward of, you know, how the water year, you know, would have progressed from February 14th forward. And then the green line here would be if we had average precipitation from this point forward, where the water year would end. And so these western slope stations missing out on the fall, which tends to be a wetter time of year, which we pretty much did, aside from one storm in Grand Junction, leaves things in not great shape for the water year. And so, you know, the vast majority of years from this point forward, using that historical precipitation, would end the water year below average after, you know, missing out on the fall, although certainly it's still possible to end up as a wetter than normal water year. The much more likely situation would be below normal at Grand Junction, and similar story at Montrose. You know, only 59% of the average through this point in the water year. And again, a wet spring and summer could get things back to above normal, but that's the less likely outcome than being below normal for the water year there. Similarly, Mesa Verde has had a really nice boost in January and February. They had been exceptionally dry until the storms started in mid-January, and you can see a couple of substantial storms in that area. So now up to 57% of average, when it had been quite a bit worse than that. But again, similar situation where it would take a very wet spring and summer to get back above average for the water year at Mesa Verde. So this is kind of the common story for the West Slope, is that having such a dry fall and early winter, you know, hurts the chances for getting the water year back to normal, whereas that isn't as true on the Eastern Plains, as we'll see. Alamosa, one place in the state that actually is above average for the water year so far, 110% of average. Really benefited from that huge snowstorm they had in October, but you know, kind of steady storms along the way here. And so, you know, kind of going right along the average projection there, and could go, you know, any number of ways going forward, but not really tilted one way or the other on that for how the water year might end up. Pueblo is 78% of average right now, and then as we'll see with these Eastern Plains stations, that where the spring and summer are a huge contributor to the precipitation, being at 78% of average as of February is not really that big of a deal. If we had average precipitation going forward, that would get to 96% of average by the end of the water year. So, you know, the spring and summer are where it counts on the east of the divide, whereas the fall and winter are more important west of the divide. Walsh in southeastern Colorado, similar story. Below average at this point, only 70% of the average, but very, very, you know, plausible to get to above average conditions by the end of the water year, or well below. Could kind of go any number of ways. Again, it really depends on what we see in the spring and summer there as how the water year will turn out. Burlington, again, only half of the average right now, but spring and summer are the key times there as well. So that's, those are the months that we need to pay attention to there, especially Burlington, the kind of far eastern plains. It's like May, June, July and August are the key months there. Oops. Well, sorry, Joel, I missed Akron. I guess I didn't paste the image in there, but it kind of looks kind of similar to most of these other Eastern Plains stations. And then Boulder, again, little over half of average through this point in the water year, but the spring and summer are where things count there. So not looking great at most places across the state, even counting the snowfall so far in February at a lot of these places. But again, these are all low elevation stations. We'll see a bit of a different story when we see the Snotel sites here in a bit. Okay, so let's take a look at where we're at with drought. This is a bit of an old image now. This is over a month ago, or almost a month ago now. The big dust storm on the Eastern Plains in mid-January. This is a satellite image that kind of they colorize the image you wouldn't actually see it being yellow from space, but they kind of use the wavelengths of the imagery to really make dust stand out in this particular image, and so you can see where all that was. So that was back in mid-January when it had been a warm, dry stretch, and then got very, very windy, bringing dust from the Eastern Plains down and all the way through Texas and into the Gulf of Mexico. So fortunately, we haven't seen any more of those in the last few weeks with the cold and snow that we've had. So here's the U.S. Drought Monitor map going back to, this is last week's map. Still looks really bad across the Southwest, and this is somewhat improved over what it looked like, a month or so ago after some recent storms, but still a pretty bad situation across the Southwest. And if we zoom in on Colorado, still 100% of the state in drought conditions. Still about a quarter of the state in D4, exceptional drought conditions, 70% of the state in D3. So still, the conditions haven't been made worse recently, but they haven't gotten all that much better either. We'll see what happens this week once we kind of take into account the recent snow. There might be a little bit of improvement to make on here, but probably not, not vast differences going forward. Just looking back, so there's the current map. This is 6 months ago, early August, just as those fires were really getting going at that point, and the map didn't look so bad at that point. I mean, pretty bad, but not as bad as it got. And we go back all the way 1 year ago. The northern parts of the state were in pretty good shape with good snow a year ago. It was starting to dry out to the south, but still nothing like what we see now, which is that. And just putting that in the time series form that we often show, going back to 2000, we can, so there's the percent of the state of Colorado that's in the different drought categories. Going back to the start of the drought monitor in 2000. So we can see 2002, 2003, and then 2012, 2013, 2018, and then the current conditions here, which we don't know how this will end, or how it will play out going forward, but we'll keep an eye on it. As you can see, we're still, have the entire state in drought conditions at this point. I thought I'd show, just looking back a little bit further then, of course, the drought monitor didn't start until 2000, but it's good to sometimes take a look back to longer term drought situation. There's a bunch of different ways you could look at this. This is a fairly simple one. Recall that we always show standardized precipitation index, and earlier I showed it out to 12 months. But you can calculate this out to longer times as well. So this is for 48 months. So this is, kind of taking 4-year running periods and looking at how much of Colorado has the SPI less than 1, going back to when good data came around in the late 1800s. And so you can see the kind of drought, the big droughts of memory that stand out here, of the early 1900s, and then the Dust Bowl and the 50s and the late 70s, and then our kind of 3 periods of dryness, 2002, 2003, and then 2012, and then the ongoing situation here. So this is if we just look at precipitation, but then if we consider the influence of temperature on this as well, and look at what's known as the SPEI, or Standardized Precipitation Evapotranspiration Index, it does change the picture a bit, and really kind of highlights the influence of the warmer temperatures on the current, or the drought, the dryness that we've had since 2000 or so. So I'll just flip back and forth there. So there's just the precip influence, and then there's when you add the influence of temperature. And so then you see these current conditions really jump up in their percentage as far as that goes. Certainly the Dust Bowl and the 50s still stand way out in this metric as well. And one other way of looking at this then is kind of averaging those over the state. So instead of how much of the state is in less than 1, this is just a different way of looking at it by averaging it. Again, this is precipitation only. And what kind of strikes me on this plot is how much the kind of the period of the mid, like the 2014 through 2017 period stands out as being relatively wet statewide. Looking at it this way in terms of precipitation, we had some some fairly wet years in there. 2015 was quite wet, 2017. So that's, but we still see 2002 and 2012, and then the ongoing situation there. But this one gets really striking when we add in the influence of the temperature, in that basically what you would look at as wet from just a precipitation perspective basically goes away in the in the kind of middle of the last decade. And then it's just sort of this prolonged dry period going back to 2000. Again, this is just another way of illustrating kind of that hot drought concept that many have pointed to, in that we're not, certainly it's been dry from a precipitation perspective, but not historically dry lately if you only consider precipitation. But if you add in the influence of the temperature, the picture is much worse. And so we can see this now starting to look bad in the current conditions, because we are, if we're looking back 4 years, we're starting losing those wet years in the mid-decade, and it's just looking bad there. So not a pretty picture as far as that goes. And this looks, if you plot this for just Western Colorado, it looks even worse, because those wet years were not as wet in that part of the state either. Evaporative demand, this time of year only tells us so much. This is 3 months looking back. And what we can see is it's above average evaporative demand over the Eastern Plains. But again, in the winter, the normal is not, this isn't something we worry too much about in the winter time. It's much more of an issue in the growing season. But we can see, Western Colorado is kind of near normal in this time period. Eastern Colorado a bit, drier, I guess, than normal, and still quite bad across parts of the Southwest there. And then I'm sure we'll get more into kind of the stream flow and soil moisture and all of that. But this image I thought was pretty striking. This does go back to February 1st, so it doesn't include the recent significant uptick in snow in the mountains, but it shows. So this is from the CBRFC forecast report that came out a couple weeks ago, and what it shows is the inches of soil moisture needed to get to saturation in the Colorado River Basin. And you can see all these dark, reds and brown colors are like 10 to 12 to more than 12 inches. And that really reflects how dry things were coming into this winter. And so I imagine this would look a tiny bit better after the last couple of weeks of good snow, but not that much. And because the ground's still frozen as well. And so anyway, we'll, just as another reminder of how bad things were kind of coming into this winter, and I'm sure we'll get more into that as we go along here. All right, so let's take a look.
Russ?
Oh, yeah.
Quick question on the graph or the map you were just showing. Those blank areas, are those just where we don't have data to fill in that map?
Oh,
Do you know?
I think that's probably right. I'm actually not somebody, I don't know, Brian or Carl, you might know a little more of the ins and outs of their particular model. But I think it's basically, it's either that I don't think it's that there's no data. I think it's more that the sort of the soil moisture that matters for runoff at this time of year is not at the low elevations. It's what's happening
Okay.
up high. So I don't know. That's my guess, but I don't actually know the answer to that specifically.
No
Yeah,
worries.
I don't know
Right,
either,
it
Russ.
doesn't reflect like wet conditions in those places because it's certainly not wet in those valleys either.
I'll look into it. Thank you.
Sorry, Brian, did I walk over you there?
No, not at all. I was just confirming that I'm not sure. I would have to reach out to CBRFC to learn a little bit more.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so we'll look forward. First, we'll look back to look forward, I guess. This is what the monthly outlook for February looked like. We're halfway through the month now. This probably will turn out to be quite a good map. Aside from the lower than average temperatures, probably will extend farther south than it shows here. But certainly the outlook was quite good at picking out how we were going to transition to these very cold conditions across the northern half of the country, and wet conditions across, the northern tier as well. So that's more or less what we've seen thus far through the first half of February, and looks consistent with what we will see the rest of the month. So actually looking forward then, here's the 7-day precipitation forecast. Looks okay. You can see, continued precipitation in the mountains, with some precipitation on the plains, like tonight and tomorrow. There's some chances of snow in the urban corridor. And so but we can compare that to average. So it kind of looks okay when you look at the map this way, but when you compare it to average for this time of year, it's not actually that great in the mountains. You can see, so this is the departure from average for that forecast. You can see like the high elevations of the Elk Range, that's still almost 2 inches below average for a week in February, meaning that the average is very, very high at this time of the winter. So we should be seeing, a couple inches per week to keep up, and that we definitely have seen that the last 2 weeks, but and we'll continue to see some snow in the mountains, but it's not, not, at least the next week or so doesn't look especially active like we've had the last couple weeks. You can see this, that little bit of precipitation we might get the next couple days is enough to be above average for, the relatively dry time of the year on east of the divide on the low elevations. And so to just kind of illustrate what we're looking at precipitation wise, this again is the global ensemble forecast. So each different color line on here is a different model forecast. The black is the average. The gray is the climatological, like the historical average. This is for Steamboat. And so it looks, near to above average precipitation with probably, kind of active periodic storms coming through, which is what we expect this time of year, and is pretty consistent with a La Nina winter to kind of have these periodic, bursts of snow coming into the northern mountains. So reasonably active there, and looks pretty good in terms of the forecast. But if we go then to the south, this is just as an example at Durango, should get a little less than an inch over this period, and the model forecasts are pretty dry down there, aside from the snow that may happen today in that area, then looks like a extended dry period again into the south. So again, northern mountains look to stay more active than the central and southern mountains for the next couple of weeks at least. And then temperature wise, this is for Denver, but we kind of will see this at wherever we look. We're slowly climbing out of the deep freeze. We have a few more days that will be colder than average. But as we get into the weekend and into early next week, we should have be back more in the average type of temperature range by that point. But it's been a pretty extended period of cool temperatures here along the Front Range. Okay, so then kind of putting that in other terms, looking out, this is the 8 to 14 day outlook. We start to see that picture again, kind of the northwestern part of the country, it tilted towards below average conditions, but most of the rest of the country warming up. Not a lot of signal for precipitation, but a better chance of dry conditions south and better chance of wetter conditions to the north, as we saw from those other graphics. And then looking out to February, March, April, unfortunately, these are still last month's forecast. The new outlooks come out on Thursday this week from NOAA. So these are the exact same maps you would have seen at last month's meeting. So I don't have any exciting new information to share as far as this goes. And obviously we're halfway through February already. But indications we get is that these probably won't change all that much. Looking at March, April, May. So this is with a kind of cooler than average north, but north of Colorado, and then tilted towards warmer than average for the southern tier of states for the most part into the spring. Precipitation wise, kind of similar. So this is very well aligned with the La Nina pattern that we're in. Where the southern tier of states tends to be drier than average and the northern tier wetter than average, and Colorado kind of falls right in the middle. So we've started off February quite consistent with this sort of pattern, but we'll see, there's a long way to go through April to see if that plays out. So again, we've been in La Nina now for the last several months, and it's fairly strong. But all the model indications are to head back toward neutral conditions by the spring. So the latest outlook shows a 60% chance that we get back to neutral conditions in the spring. The other chances that La Nina persists, not really any chance we flip, all the way over to El Nino. Getting back to neutral, I think, would be good. There's, kind of growing evidence that having these double dip La Nina years 2 in a row are particularly bad for our part of the world. So getting back to neutral would be a good thing. But that, we'll see where that goes. And again, La Nina winters usually are good for snow in the northern and central mountains, which has not been the story up to this point in the winter, although February so far has been okay. So I think that's the big question, is if we'll see a comeback into the spring for the northern mountains to get back closer to normal in terms of snowpack, whether these first couple of weeks of February are a hint at what might come, or just be sort of a little blip in a otherwise dry pattern. So just kind of look at that in context. I'll just show this for a couple things. This is statewide snowpack. This year is in the black here. And the other years all shown here are the most recent La Nina years, going back to 1989. And so what you can see is that this year is the lowest so far, even, kind of accounting for the recent snow. All these other years would point to above average statewide snowpack, at least. Again, this would vary a bit. It would be even higher to the north and a bit lower to the south. So, will we get back to what we see? There's only one of these years that's particularly low in snowpack. Most of the rest are above the average. So we'll see what happens in the spring. It's been an unusual La Nina up to this point. So we'll see where we go there. And then to kind of look at that similarly from a perspective of statewide temperature and precipitation, I'll just bring back one of these plots again. So this is for March, April, May. This is just all the years to give you a sense of what's there. You know, you have like 2012 and 1934 way up here. But then highlighting just the La Nina years in there, almost all of them are dry or, you know, near normal to dry, with only one kind of outlier out here, 1999, that was a wet spring in a La Nina spring. So the odds would be towards drier conditions into the spring, and that's kind of what, you know, why those outlooks look the way they do. It's not too common to see a really wet spring in a La Nina year, but again, not unprecedented either. If you know, the El Nino La Nina conditions only tell us so much about what's going to happen here. So takeaways, still in drought. January was warm and dry. February has been the opposite so far, but we'll see whether that continues. We remain in La Nina, but it's not been a typical La Nina, and the odds are that we transition back towards neutral conditions by the spring, but then that doesn't really then have a big influence on the atmosphere until, you know, probably next fall or something like that. La Nina is supposed to be good for snowpack, especially in the northern mountains, but we haven't really seen that so far. But maybe we've turned the tide or something in the last couple of weeks. We'll see. La Nina springs tend to lean dry, and you know, we have only one kind of extreme wet spring in there, so that's probably not something we should bank on. And as we've been saying for months, we should be prepared for a low runoff year. So I will stop there and take any questions if there are any.
Hey Russ, it's Lorna. Oh, well, I have a question about the really cold weather that we've been experiencing. You know, and this is something that was seen across the Midwest last year as well. I'm just wondering if there's any work that's being done to explore how these extreme colds will be happening over time that you're familiar with.
Yeah, this is a very hot research topic, or cold research topic, I guess, if you want to put it that way, among, you know, people who study the climate. So this is, there are some studies that have pointed to so the question amid all of this is, so the Arctic is warming faster than everywhere else on the planet, right? Or faster than anywhere else in the northern hemisphere. So as the Arctic warms more than everywhere else, what influence does that have on weather in the central US, for example? And there have been some studies that have suggested that there's a connection between, you know, temperature and snow cover over, you know, Siberia, and influences on weather on these cold outbreaks in the United States. And then other studies have said, no, that's not what's happening. And so I think it's still a pretty open question, but it's a very, very relevant question, because, you know, we're seeing cold outbreak probably unlike anything we've seen since 1899. You know, the one in 1989 was pretty similar as well. And so you know, could these be getting more frequent as a result of climate change? That there's speculation that might be even true, but it's not. Yeah, it kind of hasn't been pinned down yet. And, you know, I think probably the one thing we could say is that, you know, we know historically that these kinds of events can happen, and we might be able to say that if, you know, we had a cold outbreak like this sometime in the past, it would have been even colder than what we, you know, are seeing right now. But anyway, I think the research is still a bit inconclusive on this, because there's some some studies that say, yep, it's this connection between Arctic warming and, you know, changes in the jet stream and outbreaks of cold air, and then other studies that say, no, it's like it's the changes in the jet stream are happening, but it's not, or you know, it's not a climate change related factor. So that's kind of a long wishy-washy answer to that non-answer to your question, I guess.
Any other questions for Russ?
Good, and I see Peter chimed in the chat with more information about CBRFC soil moisture. So thanks, Peter.
Well, I agree with everyone else in the chat. This was really helpful. Thank you, Russ. And looking back at some of those maps and graphs, which I really like that quad chart. It's really helpful to see, to pull out different years. Go ahead.
Yeah, Russ, I was just going to ask what those, if you graph the second years of a double dip, what they look like, how much worse they are.
I didn't actually, I should have tried that. I didn't do it, but then you get years like 2012 in there and 2018. And well, 2018 is kind of borderline, but you definitely get 2012 in there, which makes the numbers look much worse and is not one that you want to that we want to consider.
Oh, good point. Thank you.
Maybe we're just you know, covering our eyes, not wanting to think about what another 2012 spring would look like, but let's hope we're not headed there.
Awesome. Lots of hoping. Lots of hoping. All right, I think we can get Brian set up here.
I think I successfully unshared?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Russ, Megan. Good morning, everybody. This is Brian DeMoncos. I too have not been on for a while. Carl's been given the presentations for the NRCS, so it's good to be back on. Great to join everybody. All right, let me send this into presentation mode. Can everybody see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then I have a new setup here at home. So hopefully this doesn't go sideways, so to speak, when I try to present here. It seems like it worked. All right, one last time. Can you see that there, Megan, as the
Looks
one main
good.
screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, thanks. Let me take that bottom bar off. Okay, there we go. All right, excuse me, I'm gonna clear my throat real quick. All righty. So yeah, Russ did a great job as always. Thanks for Russ. And yes, I think you ended that presentation quite well. Yeah, we're probably going to be expecting some below normal runoff numbers, and we're going to see those numbers, those predictions here, at least according to the NRCS here, shortly. But a lot of those graphs and graphics that you put up there are good indications of what we can probably expect going forward, and might want to expect some even further drier numbers and runoff numbers than what even our predictions are going to show here. So yeah, let's try and recap at least where we've been so far this year in all the basins, and recap at least the last few weeks here in February. A little preface for this presentation, I updated it on the 12th here, so a few days ago. So we're not looking at data as of this morning. We're looking at data as of the morning of February 13th. Or excuse me, February 12th, forgive me. So as Russ was pointing out, I think it's valuable to mention that, like he had already said, that typically we see the northern half of the state can do better in these La Nina years, but that has really not been the case this year, with the exception of the last week or two. And so you can see that here. We have seen a slight bump in snowpack, but it's nowhere near what we need to get back to normal. You know, we're going to need another 3-4 inches of snow water equivalent to see to realize real improvements. But right now we've been flirting with, the lowest snowpack on record. Not quite, but we're getting close there. And thanks to these last few weeks, we have seen a bump, particularly here in the Yampa White North Platte basins and some of those northern basins, but not across the state. We'll get into that here in a little bit. So we've seen an improvement. Snowpack in the Yampa White North Platte combined basins are 83% of normal as of the 12th. I think there's been a slight improvement since then up there, but again, not enough to really write home about where they're sitting. Yeah, we see a few closer to normal, but none that are above normal across the Yampa White North Platte basins as of the 12th. So through January, snowpack or precipitation, was 65% of normal, and February through the 12th has been twice the normal snowpack accumulation, but really, there's only about 1.5 inches of precipitation that we see across the different basins through the middle of February. So getting nothing to write home about it.
Hey all, I think we lost Brian there. Were other folks having choppy audio?
Yeah, and just lost his video there for now. It's back, but cannot hear him. Yeah, I can't hear him either.
Okay. Brian, if you are with us, it says you're still on. We were getting some
and here you can
audio.
See precipitation in the combined Yampa White basins was record low up until these last few weeks, or just this last week when we got a bump. But we were talking about some really dry conditions in the Yampa White Basin. Here's Streamflow Forecasts as they were for the February 1st period. We might see a slight bump in March, but like Russ was saying, we have to see how the rest of February plays out. And even still, things are so dry that it's probably going to be hard to change some of these Streamflow forecasts unless we really see some good precipitation through the rest of the month. Reservoir storage is slightly above normal at this point, but based on just Stagecoach, I don't think we had got Yamcolo reservoir information this month, unfortunately. Okay, moving on to the Colorado. Same situation here as the Yampa White North Platte, flirting with record low snowpack, and then we got a bit of a bump, which is great, but we need to see more. 83% of normal here in the Upper Colorado, according to that graphic. Across the basin, it's pretty evenly distributed. Snowpack is, below normal. A few sites are close to or above normal, but nothing that's really going to change things greatly. Last week, Carl and I were on the Grand Mesa giving a presentation, and we performed a few snow sampling measurements, and in doing so, we take the snow tube and it actually gets down to ground level and pulls up a little bit of core of ground, and that ground we saw about a 1/2 inch of frozen soil at the top, and then below that it's bone dry, almost complete dust. You can blow it off of your hand. It's so dry, and we're seeing those conditions in all of the areas, at least that I've been in. The top half inch of snow or top half inch of soil is frozen, and not frozen solid in that, it's not a full ice core. It's just some organic soil type that is duff, some people call it. It's got some frozenness to it, and then below that, it is just really dry. Haven't seen soil plugs like that in a long time. January precipitation was near half, and fortunately, February is 170% of normal so far in the upper Colorado. And then here again, favorable precipitation accumulation through the first part of February, but we need that second half to really look good. And here, I mean, 170% of normal, it looks good, but this time of year, we're just really not seeing a whole lot of precip. You can actually see that towards the end of the month, it starts to slope up a little bit, but there is a little bit of it is a little flat in here, at least for the Colorado, 75% of normal. And then Streamflow Forecast range from, what is that, about 52 to the upper 60s in all of the Colorado. Since we're on the Colorado Basin, Carl and I were also in the Roaring Fork last week, and it was snowing. It was great. It was not too cold, but unfortunately, conditions were such that Carl and I were getting stuck on our snowmobiles a lot, because what was happening is the bottom 2 feet, or actually 3 feet of snow, is heavily faceted, and those faceted crystals are, once you break through that kind of ice layer of a foot or a foot and a half down, those facets just break underneath you, and it's very light snow beneath that, which is pretty typical for low years in Colorado. Those faceted snow crystals just really don't seem to hold too much water content, which is what we're seeing on our snow pillows for those SWE observations. So just a little aside there. Reservoir storage in the combined Colorado Basin is near normal, just above 100% for this time of year, so that's good. And then here you can see, again, confirming we are close to normal, just slightly above the long-term trend here. So again, not as low as we were in 2018, but we'll have to see where things wind up going forward from here. Moving on east into the South Platte, things are a little bit better compared to the Colorado and the Yampa White North Platte basins. Got a bit of a better bump here earlier on in February, and then haven't seen quite as much as we saw out west there, but still looking a little bit better, closer to normal, just a little bit closer at 86% in the combined South Platte. Pretty evenly distributed, mid-80s in the southern portion of the basin, and then a few 90s in the northern portion of the basin, but I'd still consider it pretty evenly distributed across the South Platte. January precip was 64% of normal, and February is just short so far of 200% of normal precip accumulation. Precip here too saw a bit of a bump. Not flirting with record low here in the South Platte like we are in some of the other basins there, but still relatively low. 83% of normal for year-to-date precip. The upper South Platte, which is on the southern portion of the basin, Streamflow Forecast average a bit lower than they do in the northern half of the basins. We got Streamflow Forecast in the 70 to 80% range in the northern part of the basin, but in the southern half of the basin, we have 180 at Antero, but the other ones are near 60% of normal expected runoff. And then here, reservoir storage in the South Platte so far across the entire basin is below normal. And then here you can see, again, the long-term trend. We're starting to trend back, or continue the trend, the downward trend in the combined South Platte reservoir storage. Gunnison River Basin, where snowpack has been slightly better in the southern half of the state leading into February. Again, not flirting quite with record low in the Gunnison as were in the northwestern basins of Colorado, but still saw a good bump. Snowpack is below normal, 79% as of February 12th. Again, relatively evenly distributed, except for maybe on the western portion of the Grand Mesa where snowpack seems to be a little bit below normal. And then some of the influences of the slightly above normal snowpack that we're seeing in the Rio Grande kind of filling over here into the southeastern portion of the Gunnison Basin. But other than that, pretty evenly distributed. February precipitation much closer to normal here, and January, of course, below normal. And then here you can see the influences of the February precipitation that we've seen so far being better in the northern half of the basin, but below normal in the southern half of the basin. And then here's the precip trends that we've seen since the beginning of the year. Like Russ was saying, dry in the beginning of the year, and well, truly continued dry, but that fall portion of precip is playing an increased role across the state and here in the Gunnison Basin. If you don't get a good start to the water year, things tend to want to stay dry, it's seeming. 69% of normal in the Gunnison. Streamflow forecasts get pretty low, like Surface Creek near Cedar Edge, 39% of normal expected runoff at this point. And I think this is Paonia inflow is 41%. So looking pretty low at this point. Some of the other forecasts, at least for the southeastern portion of the basin, kind of being influenced by that slightly above normal snowpack, but still resulting in streamflow forecast in the 70s percent of normal range. Again, the dry antecedent conditions that we're seeing both in streamflow and soil playing a very heavy role in the streamflow runoff forecasts. Reservoir storage in the Gunnison combined is near 80% of normal as of February 1. And then you can see we're getting pretty low here in reservoir storage. It is coming up a bit, but we'll have to see how these conditions going into the spring play into reservoir storage. I would guess it's probably going to head back down. Moving on to the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan basins, things are a bit better here, fortunately. It's kind of nice with this presentation. Things are going to get better in this round in the format that we typically go in. The San Juans have seen some bumps in precipitation, most particularly at the end of January. And then it looks like we've started to get some precip down there. And I think things have been relatively good over these last few storms. But snowpack at 80% of normal. And then here you can see things are pretty evenly distributed. Sorry for some of these blanked out numbers. I believe we didn't have data that morning on the 12th. Snowpack slightly better here. And then precipitation, unfortunately, through January, only 67% of normal, or excuse me, through February, 67% of normal, whereas January was 73%. Again, here's where we should be, and here's where we are right now. October was extremely dry, and February's been pretty dry too here. San Miguel, Dolores, and San Juan basins, and here you go. February's been pretty dry. Again, viewing the precipitation side of things, not necessarily snowpack. Here's what's dragging down. A lot of those streamflow forecasts, the fact that precipitation is quite low, even though snowpack is slightly more normal. And then streamflow forecast, the Mancos River near Mancos, 37%. The Animas River near Durango, 58%. And then other portions of the basin looking slightly better, but still quite dry in terms of what we're going to anticipate for streamflow runoff later this year. And here, reservoir storage in the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan basin, not looking good, 60% at this point. And with conditions being as dry as they are, I would be led to believe that they would probably be trying to store as much as they could, with runoff not looking great, but I haven't talked to any reservoir managers or providers down there to know if that is what the strategy is. So here we go again. Looks like we're typically trying to come up at this point in time, depending on the year, but right now reservoir storage is flat. looking at the long-term trends. All right, moving into the Rio Grande. Things are actually looking relatively good here. Snowpack slightly above normal. Looks like it's going to run right into normal here if we don't get any snow here soon. But yeah, Rio Grande is the one bright spot in the state, so it's great to say that, with the Rio Grande having been kind of the dim spot in the state over the last number of years. It's great to say that the Rio Grande is at 102% of normal snowpack as of the 12th. And then here, pretty evenly distributed. I think the trend has been to see this year we've seen above normal snowpack. I think this is Cochetopa Snotel, and then a couple of the snowtels in the southern Sangres in Colorado. We've seen above normal snowpack, but other than that, pretty normal. January precip was 86% of normal, and February has been below normal here in the Rio Grande, unfortunately, but still near normal, so that's good. And then here, looking at the precip accumulation since February, beginning of February, things have been dry. And here again, just like we saw in the snowpack graph, it's been relatively dry in February. 86% of normal year-to-date precip in the Rio Grande. And here, again, we see the influences of that above normal snowpack here in the southeastern portion of the basin, but not so much here near Cochetopa Snotel. But in general, again, the dry antecedent conditions that we're seeing having an impact on projected runoff this spring. Reservoir storage is near about 75% of normal across the entirety of the reservoir, or the Rio Grande reservoirs, but still below normal, as we can see here. All right, last major basin, the Arkansas snowpack here is slightly below normal, but still the second best in the state at 94% as of February 12th. And then snowpack looking better in the southern portion of the basin, at least in Colorado, but still below normal. February precipitation here, 200%, 214% of normal, whereas January was below normal. Again, northern portion of the basin being favored for February precip because of the influences of those storms that we've seen. Southern half of the basin, not quite so well. A little bit of a bump in early February, but things have dried out a little bit in the second half of February. 90% of normal year-to-date precip. And here, again, the southern portion of the basin, seeing some of the benefits of those, the above normal snowpack there. However, Streamflow Forecast are still right at normal or slightly below in that area, whereas the northern part of the state, Streamflow forecasts are near about 70% of normal. And kind of like Russ was saying, and I've said earlier, I don't think that the above normal snow accumulation that we've seen here in the beginning of February will have much, if any, impact on these runoff numbers come March 1. Reservoir storage below normal here at about 70%, about 70% of normal, maybe about 68. Can't remember what that number is. And then you can see here over the long-term trend, slightly down, or down a good bit, I should say. Okay, statewide snowpack 73. This was last month. I wanted to show the slight improvement that we're seeing here. It actually looks a little bit better than it is. So here's last month, and then I'll try not to go too fast. Here's this month. You can see some of those northern basins have improved a bit. And the southern basins, or at least the Arkansas has as well. And here's another way of looking at that improvement. Snowpack statewide, 84% of normal as of the 12th. January precip was below normal statewide, and February has seen an improvement at 136% so far. Again, it's pretty distributed, where we're seeing the majority of the improvements in the northern and eastern half of the state, and the southwestern portion of the state has missed out on the above normal precip in February so far. And here we go. It's a great depiction of that. And really, I said the southeastern portion of the states has seen the improvement to the snowpack, but it's really being driven by the upper Arkansas and the improvements that's been seen there, distributing into the Arkansas basin. Nearly 200% of normal snowpack in the northern part of the state. It's been pretty good and very much needed in the Yampa White basins where things have been pretty dry. Both to close out last year and snowpack wise into the much of the year. So it's a help, but not a huge help. And then here I actually grabbed some information yesterday. So again, showing the general trends, just a 2-day improvement on the majority of the rest of this presentation, which is from the 12th. It's been, we haven't seen as much accumulation in these last 2 days as we've seen through the 12th for the northern half of the state. No real surprise there. Year-to-date precipitation across Colorado is 75% of normal. And we need to realize some more accumulation to see a real improvement. This is water year-to-date precipitation as of January 20th, when Carl gave the presentation last month, where we were at 64% of normal statewide. Again, you can see that these northern basins and western basins are pretty dry. And then moving into to the 12th of February, you can see that there was a bit of an improvement for year-to-date precipitation. The Arkansas notably moved into that next category, which makes it go from yellow to green. Again, these basins over here, North Platte, Yampa White, Colorado, were in the brown, or orange, I should say, excuse me, and bumped up into the yellow, so that's great. And these numbers here in the Gunnison and the combined San Miguel, Dolores, San Juans were lower, and they came up as well. So there has been an improvement, but I wouldn't call it a marked one. Here's the February 1 Streamflow forecasts. Really not looking all that great. So something to anticipate for February 1. Oh no, my computer seems to have frozen. Okay, so that was the February 1 graphic. And then I wanted to throw in statewide total reservoir storage. There was a hiccup with the reservoir map that we typically put out, so I threw this one out there. Statewide reservoir storage is at 83% of normal. The combined Yampa White is at 100%. The combined Colorado is 101 of what we typically see. Some of these numbers might be off a little bit. It's not the typical map that we use. And I think it throws or uses some reservoirs that might be slightly outside of the state. So just be a little leery of this if you're using it for comparisons to last month or even to the following month. And then here's a reservoir storage trend. Reservoir storage did go up 1% statewide, as it has been over the last few months. We saw a nice bump in the Yampa White, but that's based off of the one reservoir. So that's something to have an asterisk next to. Just keep it in mind if you're using the comparison. And then here's the long-term reservoir storage, very slight uptick, but nothing really to write home about. Thanks to Division of Water Resources, Elise got this to me this morning, and I was able to incorporate it. There was a downgrading across many of the basins in the Colorado, the Yampa White, and the Gunnison, based off of those February 1 forecasts going down, and probably even reservoirs. But yeah, a lot of these downgraded to the next lower, to the extremely dry, as opposed to just moderately dry. So again, it will be interesting to see what the rest of February does, how that impacts Streamflow forecast for March 1. And I would anticipate that we will probably not see much of an uptick unless we see some real good precipitation accumulation here through the end of February. I would anticipate things are probably going to remain this way. Swazis, will remain this way for March 1. So in summary, February precipitation in the northern and eastern basins, well, including the Arkansas, just because of the headwaters, have been more favorable, closer to normal, but we'll have to see how things play out for the rest of February. Reservoir storage is near normal in several northern basins, but statewide is below normal. In the southern half of the state is what's bringing it down. Unfortunately, reservoir storage just we can't. It's not improving. Antecedent stream flows are just too low. Snowpack has improved, fortunately, to 84% on February 12th, but we have a long way to go to really make up for those deficits. At this point in the year, as of the 15th, as of yesterday, we're typically 71% of the way through the snowpack accumulation season. So we're really running out of time to make improvements, but we will see. And kind of like Russ said, I thought that was a great forward-looking outlook. It's not looking all that great. There's a chance, at least in the northern basins, but things aren't looking too great. Like we're going to make big improvements. And then can't help but highlight how dry the soils are, how low the base flows are, and it probably won't see much of an improvement to Streamflow forecasts, at least through March 1, based on the conditions that we're seeing right now. So that is all that I have, unless there's any questions.
Hey, Brian. This is Lorna. I was wondering if, if we had 4 more storms, would that bring us back up to average conditions? What will it take? What would it take in the spring to be?
Are my speakers off? I'm seeing, is somebody talking right now?
Yeah, I was talking. Can other people hear me?
I can hear you, Lorna. I don't think Brian could hear me earlier, so let me type in the chat here. Brian, can you hear us?
Megan, are you talking?
Okay, so I don't think Brian can hear us, and he was having some audio issues, so it just might be that his speakers are off. Lorna, could you type your question to the chat?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Ben sent a question. I'm still not hearing anything. I'm assuming you guys can still hear me. The question was, how many storms or what amount would we need to get us back to normal? Yeah, that's right, Ben. I can't hear you, unfortunately, but if you can still hear me. So how many storms would we need to get back to normal? We would need a lot. I don't actually have the numbers right now, but here I'll pull up the Colorado graphic. Oh, and I think I stopped sharing, by the way. I might have to request to share again.
If you have any other questions for Brian, just type them into the chat there.
Here, we'll share my screen again. And maybe I need to, let me see if I could turn my mic back, or my earphones back on. Okay. So, I didn't mean to do that from the beginning. Sorry, guys. Pop out of here. Okay. All right, so from current slide. So one thing to note is this is typically part of the year where we receive a little bit more snowpack than the rest of the year. So if this is where we're at right now, and we're seeing that's about it's probably about 8 inches, 8.5 inches of snow water equivalent for the whole entire state, and we need to be somewhere in here. It's about the 12 to 13 range. Let's call it 13. We need about 5 inches of snow water equivalent accumulation. That's the equivalent of like 5 feet of snow, arguably a little bit less. So we'd need a big storm cycle, excuse me, to realize any real gains just to get back to normal. Excuse me. So we would need a lot of precip right now, a lot of snow storms, some big ones, you know, on the scale of, say, the March 2003 storm is what we would need to kind of maybe get back to normal at this point. But like Russ was saying, it would need to be distributed across the entire state, and it's probably not all that likely to see something like that at this point in time. Sorry, Russ, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Russ wasn't necessarily saying that. I would gander that it's probably relatively unlikely at this point. Excuse me again. Let me step out and see if I can't get my headphones working. My mic won't work. Okay, I see another question. Do Streamflow forecasts take into consideration the effect of low soil moisture? Yes, for the most part they do. And those Streamflow forecasts are taking that into account. The low antecedent stream flows, the low base flows, and the dry soils. It kind of takes into account the dry soils, not so much, but more so with the stream flows it does take into account. So, and the dry soils are kind of attributed to those low soil conditions, or the low stream flow conditions, forgive me. Okay, the next question from Peter. I'm just a little surprised there wasn't a bit more emphasis on the changes between February 12th and now. I am right with you on being concerned about antecedent conditions, but it looks like today statewide snowpack is about 90% of normal. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate that. Yeah, I just didn't have time to update the presentation yesterday. Okay, yeah, and then Peter had one more comment after that. And no, Megan, I can't hear anybody. Let me see if I can turn off my headphones real quick and turn it back on. All right, I think I was able to cycle them. Can everybody still hear me?
Can you hear us?
Okay. Okay. Sounds good, Megan. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for putting up with that audio stuff, everyone, and typing into the chat. We're going to get moving on the agenda into the next section, which I believe are the water provider updates. Is that, yeah. So if we could do this, I'm going to just run down the list that I have here in front of me. And one thing, just to preempt your update, I did hear from Denver Water, Jason, who's on the call, I believe still, that Denver Water and several other water providers have been hearing from different NGOs with drought-based missions, and that several providers have been reached out to try and coordinate on, you know, whether it's drought communications, drought solutions. And so if you can add in your update, if you've been hearing a lot from whether they're local or statewide nonprofits around wanting to coordinate, if you could mention who those entities are, we're going to try and think about how to coordinate those external groups in either future water availability meetings or just state coordination meetings with the various task forces we have going on. So I'm going to kick it off to, let's see, Brian with Aurora. Can you start us off?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Aurora's storage is currently at 63% of capacity, which is just about normal for this time of year for the city. And obviously demands have been, wintertime demands the normal, so nothing really new there. And as far as drought communications, we are in contact with Denver Water and other agencies to formulate a drought messaging plan. We have activated our internal drought action team, and we're meeting on a fairly frequent basis right now, and we'll continue to do so through, through April anyway, depending on conditions. But yes, we are in communication with outside entities, other than Denver Water and the state, the governor's municipal task force. I couldn't tell you if we're talking to any other NGOs or not.
Okay, thank you. How about City of Thornton?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, John.
Hi. Yeah, this is John Orr with City of Thornton. Let's see, sorry, I got to click. Here I am. Our storage is sitting at 70.5%, which is down a little bit from normal because we drew down one of our reservoirs for a project. And Stanley Lake is sitting at 71.9%. And the partners are still thinking that Stanley Lake will probably fill this year, and because of that nice senior senior rights on Clear Creek. Our production is 2.39% below 2020, so that's a good trend. But with all the cold weather is probably responsible for that. And if it heats up with the dry soils, our customers, our ratepayers will probably start watering some. But, and then Jason Fineout from Denver Water sent a meeting request to all sorts of entities this morning for that drought and drought messaging. And City of Thornton prepared a drought messaging document and sent it to Jason last week, I believe. And so that's moving along well. City of Thornton is still seeking to activate we have to have a council resolution to activate our drought management plan. And we're working on all the paperwork for that as we speak, including drought watering restrictions rules. So that's kind of my report.
Thank you. Jason, do you mind going next? I'm going in the same order as last month.
Yeah, no, not at all. And so, yeah, thank you for everything, Megan. And the idea of the NGOs, we have so many non-governmental organizations that focus on water efficiency and drought, water shortage preparedness. They definitely have a lot to offer in terms of resources and, messaging, things like that. And so we will be discussing in our coordination groups coming up, along with, thank you, Megan, with the state to see how best to utilize these organizations and make sure that they're plugged in at the right place. On that note, I would like to real quick just define those groups that we kind of mentioned earlier. So what we have done in the Denver-Aurora metro area is Denver Water and Aurora Water have partnered together to facilitate a metro drought coordination group. And right now it includes 26 water providers inside of the Denver-Aurora metro area. And it is a facilitated coordination group, which means that it's not, it's just kind of a facilitated group where we share information and share ideas, but nothing mandatory, of course, comes out of it. Each of us are our own water provider with our own customers and water systems. And so it really, just to kind of make sure everyone knows, it's really just this facilitated idea generating, brainstorming, attempting to come up with general messaging, understand where everyone is on restrictions, that type of thing. And we're really excited about it. We have our second meeting coming up mid-March. And then moving up a level of region, we have a front range coordination group that we've just started with first meeting invites sent out for this Friday. And that includes all of the major metro regions along the front range, from Fort Collins down to Pueblo. And that'll be the next level of group where we meet and discuss our metro regions, the kind of communications in the metro region and restrictions overall. And then, of course, the next group up is the state. I always mess this up. I think it's the Municipal Drought Water Task Force. Maybe. I think those are the right words, maybe not in the right order. Megan, correct
Close
me on
enough.
that.
The Municipal Water Task Force.
Oh, thank you. All right. So, and then that's where the state, of course, gives us information from the state level. So ideally, we'll be able to take information from the state down to the front range coordination group, down to each of our individual metro groups. And then, of course, information from those metro groups works its way back up. It's a nice back and forth on coordination. So then to give you a Denver water specific update. So the snows have actually been very good to us, although, you know, we were at a very bad place and now it's trending better. I mean, that's the best thing you can say, but it's still cause for concern. So our reservoirs right now are at 77% full, and normally they're at 80% full. So we're just slightly below average, and that's a 40-year running average for the state. Now for our specific Snotel sites, Denver water specific Snotel sites, we have 96% of our normal accumulation in the Colorado River watershed, and 103% of normal accumulation on the South Platte. And again, that's Denver water specific. Now, of course, we're talking about dry soils, so you know, who knows what the percentage is that we need to reach in order to try to get normal stream flows. But the more snow, the better. And so that's our update.
Yeah, thanks for reviewing those different scales of coordination. I think they'll work well together. Let's see, Isabel with Broomfield, are you on? Yes.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Hey. Yes, we can.
Oh, great. So let's see. This for Boulder last month in January, our production was a little bit lower, about 5% less than last January. And so far, our reservoirs are doing okay, but just like everybody else, we're hoping for some more snow in the spring. We're continuing to do some maintenance at one of our bigger reservoirs, so that level has been intentionally low since about October. But our high mountain reservoirs have been doing okay so far. So that's about it.
Okay, thanks for that.
Sure.
I don't see within from Highlands Ranch. What about Northern Water, Emily? Oh, she's not on either. Let's do, how about Lorna? Do you mind letting us know what's happening up north? All right, going on to Katie.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Katie Mazurowski with Colorado Springs Utilities. Right now, our reservoir storage is at about 71%, and that's at about 4% higher than our 2001 to 2020 average, which is obviously pretty good coming into this dry year. Our production has been pretty normal, pretty consistent, so nothing really new there. Our snowpack on the north and south slope of Pikes Peak is pretty low at about 66% of snowpack on south slope, and then about 76% of average on the north slope of Pikes Peak. In the Blue River system, we're a bit above average at about 112% normal. So that's pretty good there. As far as the communication from other NGOs regarding drought planning, I'm not familiar with any of that, but I think Halsum is on and she might be able to speak better to that than I can. Hi,
I'm here. I mean, we have a lot of touch points with local entities. I'm not aware of any formal or planned conversations with others right now.
All right, thanks for letting us know. Let's see, David with Rio Blanco, would you like to give an update? Okay. How about Joel or let's see, DK? I think we have several folks who are just listening in, so I am going to just open, I'm trying to scan the list here. I'm just going to open up for if you are a water provider or even, you know, Parks and Wildlife, anyone who's on the call who would like to provide an update to the group.
Hey everyone, this is Brennan Middleton with the City and County of Broomfield. Broomfield's potable water supply is supplied from two sources. About 40% of our total firm supply consists of treated water purchased from Denver Water, and the remaining 60% is Northern Water from both the CBT and Windy Gap projects. So the main factor affecting our water supply availability each year is the CBT quota set by the Northern Water Board. So we won't have a full picture of our total supply until the supplemental quota gets set in April. It's not completely certain at this time how the watershed impacts from the East Troublesome Fire will affect this year's supplemental quota or in upcoming years for that matter. It's possible that the fire will have lasting effects on both CBT project water quantity and quality. One component of our supply system that is particularly vulnerable to drought conditions is our reuse water supply. We use our reuse supply to satisfy irrigation demands for parks, golf courses, and green spaces throughout Broomfield. Last year, our reuse reservoir, Great Western, reached its second lowest level on record, or about 20% capacity. And today we're sitting at about 70%, which is still a little bit below normal. So in response to this year, we've been working on an operations plan for our reuse system and some potential drought restrictions to help alleviate the effects of drought this year and in years to come. There's been no coordination with any NGOs to this point that I know of. Thanks.
Thanks, Brennan. Other providers on the phone?
Hey Megan, this is Rob Harris at Parks and Wildlife.
Hi there.
Yeah, so if this is a good time for me, I mean, we don't have too much to cover. You know, the most acute issue that's happened so far is with our Durango hatchery. I understand we've had to ramp down production there, which due to record low flows, and which has forced us to stock some fish earlier than normal. Otherwise, I think as Brennan, you know, referenced, I mean, we're keeping a close eye on the runoff situation, not just from a water supplies perspective, but from a erosion perspective in the burn areas. So that's going to be these lower predictions are actually something of a mixed blessing in light of that factor. So, you know, in any event, that's about it from Parks and Wildlife right now.
Appreciate that update. Tracy, anything from GWR?
Nothing here, Megan. Thanks.
Okay. I think we can move on to we have a short presentation from Denver Water. Ben, can you remind me who that was?
Yeah, it's Taylor Winchell is going to be presenting for us today.
Hey everyone. If you can't see my screen, just yell at me as I'm going along. Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us here today on your meeting. I'm Taylor Winchell. I do climate change adaptation and water supply planning at Denver Water. And today I'm presenting on behalf of a much larger work group, which will be detailed later in the presentation, and many of which are actually on this call. And do want to recognize here Larna Cates from Denver Water and Emily Carbone from Northern Water, who have both been involved in the planning stages of this project as well. And so this is a WSRF, Water Supply Reserve Fund project that we're calling the Colorado Airborne Snow Observatory's expansion plan. And we're really here to talk to you today, one, just to let you know what's happening with this project as we're starting to kick it off, and then also hopefully to get some input from you on some key questions we have as we're going into the project. Let's see, let me figure out, I always have trouble advancing my first slide and go to meeting. Oh, there we go. So on that note, just some on the feedback note, just some primer questions to think about as I'm going through this presentation that we'll come back to at the end. So one being just, what is the value of annual ASO flights to your work and sector? Two, what months would be preferred for flights for your organization or sector? And then three, who else should we connect with? We're really addressing this as a large multi-stakeholder process, and we're trying to engage as many perspectives as possible. And then four, just whether or not you'd like to engage with us throughout the duration of the project. And for this group, especially with regards to questions 1 and 2, I encourage people to think about it from a perspective of both a drought response perspective and drought communications perspective, which we think ASO can have a lot of value for both of those things. So just a quick recap for those who might be less familiar with what Airborne Snow Observatory's technology is. So ASO is really a combination of 3 technologies. One being a flight or an airplane, 2 being LiDAR, which is a laser distance measuring technology, and then the 3rd being spectrometry, which measures the reflectance of a surface. And so what ASO does is it first flies over a watershed and uses the LiDAR to measure the distance from the plane to the snow-free surface. So it first flies when there's no snow on the ground and establishes that reference point. And then it flies it again during times when there's snow on the ground and measures that distance again. And then it does a simple subtraction of the snow on distances minus the snow-free distances and applies a few other calculations. And what you end up getting is snow depth across entire watersheds or entire basins at 3-meter resolution, which is really resolution with an accuracy level that we've never seen before in snow measurement technologies. And what you end up getting are these really incredible data output products that look like this. So you'll probably recognize this as the maroon bells here in Colorado. And what we're seeing here is ASO output of snow depth across this watershed, where the red areas are deeper snow pockets, and then the blue areas are shallower snow pockets. And this really shows the variability that we all know exists within snowpacks throughout watersheds, but is really difficult to measure without these basin-wide scale measurement systems. And you can see areas where there's like really steep cliffs, and those are more blue, shallow, as you might expect, and then the deep pockets that are more red with the deeper snow. And then to put this into perspective from a water provider perspective, so for a pilot case study here, so Denver Water did an ASO pilot in 2019. where we did 2 flights, and we tried to target the first flight to be around peak SWE, and then the second flight to be when the Snotel stations in the Blue River watershed, which you're seeing here, when those Snotel stations had completely melted out. And those 4 red dots that you're seeing in the watershed, those are the locations of the Snotel stations. And so the image on the left there, that's from April 19th. That was around the peak SWE period. And you can see there's still a ton of snow in the watershed. 2019, if you recall, was a pretty wet year. We got a lot of late season precip. And then in that flight in June, so this was the period when those Snotel stations had essentially completely melted out. But what you can see with what this ASO data shows is that there's still quite a bit of snow left in those really high elevations in the watershed, where again, that red shows deeper pockets of snow and blue shows shallower. And actually what ASO was able to provide us was that there was still 115,000 acre feet of water contained in that snowpack at those high elevations in that June date, when if we were just going off of Snotel levels, they would tell us that there's no water up there because they were melted out. And so our operations manager, Nathan Elder, was able to use this info to appropriately lower Dillon and be able to maximize the use of that water still remaining in the high elevations, and 2, not flood Silverthorne, which is another great benefit that we're able to use this data for. So it has a lot of utility at the water supply scale. And the takeaway from this is really that ASO provides an accurate estimate of volume of water. For us, it's most useful in acre feet, but of course you can use volume in whatever unit you'd like, remaining in the snowpack throughout a watershed or an entire basin. So this brings us to our project and the current state of where ASO is at. So we know that ASO technology works and adds value, but we also know that ASO pilot projects in Colorado have been geographically scattered and lack consistent year-to-year funding. And so what the question that we're asking and hoping to answer with this project is, how can we build, excuse me, a sustainable Colorado ASO program that benefits as many water stakeholders as possible? And so our goal with this project is really to develop and communicate a roadmap for creating a phased and sustainable ASO flight program in Colorado that would ultimately benefit multiple basins in a diverse group of water stakeholders. And so just to clarify, this isn't a project where we're looking to use this money to go do flights, but rather we're looking to, gather perspectives and establish this kind of longer term vision and plan for how we can establish a consistent ASO program throughout the state where we can make most use of this data. And we know that in doing this, it's in trying to set up a program like this and thinking through it, there are many questions that need answering. And a lot of these questions really emerge from, hallway conversations that we were having with various water providers, of people that were interested in using ASO data, but kind of needed some of these larger questions answered before money could start being allocated towards it. So these, I'll just go through this small subset of questions we're hoping to answer throughout the scope of this project. Things like, which basins should be flown to benefit the most stakeholders? How often should they be flown? How much would it cost each year? And what's the cost benefit? How can we collaboratively and sustainably fund flights to really maximize the value for each of our dollars? What data does ASO actually provide? What information is most valuable to water agencies? How would the data be managed and distributed? And what additional value would an expanded ASO program bring to the state? And our approach to this project is really through this co-production and analysis approach. And I alluded to this earlier, that there's a much larger work group working on this project. So we have our project planning team, which consists of our team at Denver Water, a team at Northern Water, who's also the fiscal agent for this project, ASO Inc., who's providing technical guidance for the project, and then a local consultant in Boulder, Linker Technologies, who I know many of you have worked with, who will really be producing the reports and materials for this project and conducting a lot of the analysis. And then we have this much larger collaborative work group, which at this point actually expands far beyond what's just listed on this page, but this was the original collaborative work group, and all of these entities wrote letters of support for this project. And if you just read through this list, you can see it's a pretty unique group of entities that spans both sides of the divide and basins throughout all corners of the state, really. And there was a lot of internal excitement within the group, and someone, I can't at the moment remember which entity it was from, but made this logo for our project, which was pretty cool for Colorado Airborne Snow Observatories. So there's a lot of excitement ramping up around this project. And then we're going to be approaching the work through 4 tasks primarily. So the first task is really going to be basin flight planning, data collection, and analysis, which is really looking at, where in the state should we be flying, at what elevation should we be flying, what basins overlap between stakeholders, so we can understand who would be using the data within each basin, things like this, and really working out some of those early questions. And then the second major task, and this is really where our larger collaborative work group will most come into play, is the stakeholder values research, which is really trying to understand how all types of stakeholders, one, would use this data, and two, how can we make it most useful for the most number of stakeholders. And so we have this group of water providers, but we're also talking to the agricultural sector, to DWR, to the recreation sector, to the environmental sector. We're really trying to include all perspectives in this project. And then the third task is really doing a funding stream review and trying to understand and plan out how we can fund a statewide ASO program into the future, looking at state funding, federal funding, local agency funding, how we would combine those, and looking at different models for similar projects. So for example, like cloud seeding, how do they fund their project, and just getting ideas and seeing what's worked and what hasn't throughout the state and really throughout the West. And then finally, we'd be looking at a governance structure for the future of a Colorado ASO program. So this gets back to those questions of like, how would the data be managed? Is there a website? Is there staff dedicated somewhere that's really leading this into the future? So there's a lot of questions to be answered throughout this project. And this is our primary approach of how we're approaching it now. And so bit of a call to those on the call here. As I said, we're trying to bring as many perspectives as we can into this project moving forward. And if you're interested in joining our collaborative and contributing your perspective to this project moving forward, please reach out to myself or Larna or Emily Carbone, and I'll put our emails up here in a second, or you can put your email in the chat as well. We'd really like to have you moving forward. And these are, you see listed here, just a few of the new partners that have come on board since we've really started proposing this project last fall. And with that, I'll come to my final slide here, again with our contact info up there, and just putting back up those discussion questions that I started the presentation with. And I'll take any questions, and if you can either put in the chat your response to some of these questions, or if you want to just unmute yourself and talk about them as well. Like I said, we're trying to gather information early in the project as to, you know, what is the value of ASO flights to your work in sector, again, with that drought perspective of drought response and drought communications, or if you have another perspective you want to bring at the moment as well, we'd love that. And what months are preferred flights? So we've generally assumed so far that this time scale of doing flights around peak SWE and when snow's melted out might be most useful to folks, but we're open, very open to other perspectives as well. And so, yeah, we'd love to hear from y'all. So I'll take any questions or comments.
Thanks, Taylor. That was great. One thing we're really interested in hearing, this is Larna. Hi, everyone. One thing we're really interested in hearing from this audience is, as Taylor noted at the beginning, how ASO flights could help with drought messaging and drought preparedness. And, you know, tying it back to Brian's presentation and Russ's presentation, you know, I think the idea that we would do a flight at peak SWE, peak snowpack is great. And then a flight when we do after Snotel is saying that the snow's all gone, which we know there will still be high elevation snow is critical. But I mean, if we had our own plane, it would be great to do flights after storms to see how productive some of these storms are. You know, so if 3 or 5 storms happen in the spring in this situation, so let's say March and April, we have, you know, 2 storms each month. What does that look like with our coverage and with our depth to get a better sense of what the productivity of those storms are, especially when we're in severe drought conditions throughout the entire state. I don't know, do folks have thoughts on something like that?
I'm okay with the uncomfortable silence until people speak up, but it, it might just be, is there, I mean, hopefully everyone knows, you know, this is something you could reach out to these folks about. You know, thank you for posting your emails. Lorna or Taylor, is there any sort of, you know, timeline or feedback loop that you would, you know, is this just building the partnerships at the moment and, you know, working together on what a timeline looks like, or? Is it something that you might want to come back in a future meeting to like give an update on where it stands? The project?
Yeah, for now.
Go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah, for now, yeah, just kind of establishing the early framework for the project and getting any feedback. If anyone has, you know, some thoughts on that might, you know, help guide the early direction of the project, and then also just hoping to recruit more folks into this larger work group. And then we'd love to come back and present as we're making progress with the project, which we're hoping to complete by this fall. So again, to get feedback and just update folks on where we're at with things. And Brian, I will just address your comment. Thanks for that comment. It's definitely, you know, really valuable to point out that just because snowtels are melted out doesn't mean there's more snow up there that's not going to run off. And what we're really hoping that ASO is able to provide in the future is, you know, when these snowtels go dark, essentially when they melt out, it's hard to get an estimate of how much water is still up there in the watershed. And this is really where ASO can shine and provide that info to the state. And we've present this, and a lot of people think that because we're presenting on ASO, we're anti-Snotel. We're like very pro Snotel, and Snotel is, you know, ASO technology utilizes Snotel to be able to make these accurate measurements and ground truth their measurements. And you know, ASO actually wants more Snotel stations throughout the system. So we really think there's no silver bullet to this snow monitoring and snow measurement throughout Colorado, and you really need a all of the above approach with Snotels, manual snow courses, ASO, and further satellite information. So thanks for that, Brian. And yeah, with that, I'll just encourage anyone, you know, if you'd like to put my email here in the chat to reach out if you'd like to be a part of our efforts moving forward. And thanks again for having us today.
Thanks, everyone. I'm not sure if I was on mute or what, but we're at time, so thanks for tuning in, and we'll get this presentation posted on the web and the monthly report out in the next few weeks.
Hey, Meg, you're good. You're kind of faint there.
Yeah, I seem to be having mic issues as well, so I'm just saying thank you.
Okay. I think that's the wrap up then. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.